Welcome to our first model of the second semester. This is the circular flow model, or the model that helps us take a holistic view of the economy. We're looking at the economy overall here. It is a model, so there's a couple of caveats, which first is generally models often simplify very complex systems or complex situations to make them more manageable and practical for our brains to handle and allow us to manipulate and see what happens. Because of this, it makes a lot of assumptions, and maybe it eliminates or hides some detail that exists in our real life or the real world to make our economic lives a little bit easier. So just be wary when you use it, because I think it's important to know that any model has some deficiency. So in the words of Professor Box, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So always keep this in mind, that a model isn't perfect. It does have some uses, but it may not, again, apply at all times and in all places. Okay, so moving on. In the beginning, God created heavens and earth. Sorry, the different story. Our story is one of economics and a situation where we have two economic actors. The first is households. So households, when we say this word, we normally think of a complete, maybe nuclear family with parents and children, or maybe extended grandparents may be living there as well. But it also includes, in addition to that, individuals or single people who are head of their own household. So for example, you go to university, your first job out of university is working in a big city, either in Bangkok or somewhere else in the world, and you are living by yourself. You are the head of your household. So you are all also included in this economic actor category. The other economic actor we care a lot about when we talk about the circular flow is firms. Now you may see this represented, we could call them businesses, we could call them enterprises, but really firms is the word we choose to use in economics most frequently, particularly at high school and university level. So we have these two parties. The assumptions we make of households: they will buy and consume goods and services. Again, goods, tangible goods you can touch. Services you receive at the point of sale. So it could be legal and tax advice. It could be something like a massage. It could be the education you're receiving now or you will receive in university. We also assume that households in an economy own all the factors of production. So all the land, all the labor, all the capital, all the entrepreneurship are owned and controlled by households themselves. About the firms, the two assumptions we generally make: they produce and sell all the goods and services. And of course, you have friends, and COVID has led a lot of people to be craftsmen, craftswomen, selling things online, doing things on Instagram, producing their own things. But we assume, for this model, that firms do all the production of goods and services. We also assume that firms do not have the factors of production in the beginning. So they need to hire to purchase these factors of production, so the land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. The two actors, and now we have two places where they interact. The first place they interact is the factor market. So this is where factors of production are traded. So people with factors of production, the households, offer those factors of production for sale or for rent, and then firms buy or rent those factors of production from the households in order to produce the goods and services. So the second market, second market they interact with together in is the product market. So this is the product market for finished goods and services. Firms have produced goods and services, they bring them to the product market. Households buy goods and services because they don't produce goods and services themselves. Now the factor market and the product market, these are theoretical constructs. There's not one factor market out there. There's not one product market out there. There's many, thousands, millions of places where households and firms interact in our world. So the product market includes all the department stores, all the grocery stores, all the small stores you find on the side of the street. It also includes your regular dalat, with people buying and selling, market activity anywhere it can be found. Likewise, factor market is any place where a household, someone who has the factor of production, is renting it or selling it to a firm. So it can happen anywhere. And both of these, factor and product market, represent aggregates. All of these things everywhere. So what happens? Households, again, they take the factors of production, the factor market. Firms, they bring their money in order to rent or buy the factors of production. So if we think from a business perspective, this money is their cost of production. It's their expenses. And if you recall from last semester, we talked about factors of production and the payments for each of the factors of production. So land receives rent, labor receives wages, capital receives interest, and entrepreneurship, if they're successful, receives profit. So they interact in the factor market. The households bring their factors of production, they sell or rent them, and they receive this rent, wages, interest, and profit. All together, we call that household income, the income they receive. Firms, they get the factors of production. Now that they have them, firms can produce the goods and services. So once they produce the goods and services, they bring them to the product market. And households, having received the household income before, they now spend that income, that money that they received, as expenditure. We could say spending, but expenditure is the word that's often preferred. So they interact in the product market. Households, spending the money, receive the goods and services, they take them back, they consume them, they use them. And then firms, having sold the goods and services, receive money, which counts as their revenue. So on the income statement for a business, revenue is the top line item. And the two different colored arrows, payments, they move in a counterclockwise fashion, whereas products and factors of production, they move in a clockwise fashion around this. So this is the simple circular flow. We say that there are two sectors, so two significant participants in this model. You will not need to produce this for the AP exam, just FYI. But there's also something called the 5-sector model, and this is the one I will actually ask you to reproduce because I think this gets a little bit closer to the world that we live in. Of course, a lot of things are still neglected or still left out. But again, we start with our two economic actors, firms and households. And you'll notice that I've switched the orientation here. So instead of being kind of horizontal or landscape, it's now vertical in this case. So firms up top, households on the bottom. And we start with our simplified flow. So in this case, the Y for economic purposes represents national income. So if you go back to the previous slide, you'll see that's the household income they receive from selling their factors of production. And then C represents consumption or expenditure, consumer expenditure. And this is the money that they spend in the product market on the goods and services. So in the factor market, households receive Y from selling the factors of production. In the product market, households spend or they pay C in order to receive the goods and services. So this is what we just did. Now let's make it a little bit more complicated, because in real life it is a little bit more complicated. Instead of just spending money on things that firms produce, the goods and services, there's actually a couple other things that happen. So first place money tends to leak out from our perfect circular flow is savings, because households won't spend everything that they make. So S represents savings. And typically, most households will put savings in bank. Second thing, most of us live in countries where we need to pay taxes. Of course, we probably know people who might try to avoid taxes, but taxes need to be paid, and we pay those taxes to the government. The third leakage is, dun dun dun, anybody remember? Imports. So imports are money that we send to the rest of the world so that we can get things from them. So it could be electronics, it could be luxury goods, it could be anything that we import, good or service we import from the rest of the world. So these are what we call leakages. You add up all the savings, all the taxes, all the imports. These are leakages from our income flow, from our circular flow. So this is money that leaves the perfect flow of Y and C, the interactions between households and firms. But there is a way that this money that is leaked out of our circular flow gets back into it. So normally, banks lend to businesses because businesses, especially if they're undertaking a big project, an expansion, a new factory, they really need to borrow money because they don't have it themselves. We call this gross private investment or investment, and banks provide that money to firms, and firms now receive that money. It's an injection back into the firms. Governments don't just keep the taxes they receive, they often spend them on things like roads, on healthcare, on education, on submarines, depending on the country. So again, this government spending, because firms produce all the goods and services in the economy, governments spend money with firms. Because governments in most countries don't produce the things that they need. In some countries they do, but in many countries, private sector firms are the ones that do so. And the rest of the world often likes the things that our firms in our country are producing. So our firms receive money from those rest of the world residents, so anybody outside of the country we're talking about, in exchange for the goods and services that our firms produce. So the money makes it back in. In this case, we have investment, we have government spending, we have exports, and all of these, if we add them up, we say these are injections to the income flow. So money coming back into our circular flow. So we have money going out, money coming in, and the black arrows all represent money. So again, these are not factors that are moving around. This is money. This is capital that's making its way around the circular flow. So I would encourage you, this is something you need to commit to memory, these interactions, and we will be practicing this in class going forward.